Hi there, my name is Jennifer Biwersi. I'm one of the co-directors of Music for Your Inbox. And today we're going to have another one of our artist chats with the artist behind the film we're featuring on our virtual programming this month, Ian Power and Clint McCallum. We're also going to be joined by the other co-director, Cassia Streb, and I'm going to stick around, obviously, because we helped make the film this month, and we thought it'd be great for discussion about how it was made, and all of the great details about things. So I'm going to get everyone invited, and then we'll have our conversation. Hey, Cassia.
Hi, Jen.
We got Clint too.
Yay!
Hey,
Oh my gosh.
sorry about that.
We did it. Everyone's here. I'm going to do some introductions. We have Clint McCallum and Ian Power and Cassia Streb. Clint is a performer, composer, poet, and featured as a performer, composer in this month's film. And Ian is a performer, composer. And Cassie and I are here. I'm pointing, I don't know where everyone else's boxes are, but Cassie and I are here as the co-directors of Music for Inbox. But we thought we'd stick around on this one because we helped make the film. And we would love to chat about the behind the scenes and all that good stuff. So maybe to start, I think it could be really interesting to hear about like how you two came together as a duo and like why a duo and what are you interested in working on together?
Yeah, and I think you should take the lead on this one.
All right. So Clint and I met as grad students at UC San Diego in the late 2000s. And while we were there, we were very influenced by two performance artists and musicians named Ed Harkins and Phil Larson, who had a sort of performance arty duo called which they had been doing since the 70s and were still doing in the late 2000s when we were there. They each taught classes and were really amazing and weird, importantly, musicians. Um, I was drawn, I think, to the musicality of what they were doing. Ed taught an advanced rhythm reading class at UC San Diego, and a lot of his sort of mastery of tuplets and things like that, and their really tight coordination was shown in the pieces that they performed. And Clint and I started performing weird pieces together in a trio with Carolyn Chen, and made a bunch of weird pieces, which maybe we can describe later, as a group called Bodies. We all went our separate ways, and then Clint and I ended up in Baltimore years later, I suppose 15 years later, and I was sort of pining for those days, and that sort of open-minded attitude we had at UCSD and how easy it was to just sort of pull stuff off there. And so I said to Clint, what if two 40-year-old dudes got together every Wednesday night and banged the wall and practiced hard rhythms? And so we put on a show called A Soul, A Desire in Baltimore and at the Dog Star Festival in LA. And so that's how we got started doing stuff together.
Yeah, and so I think it's good to describe because we here at Music for Inbox cater to a wide range of weird. So what was the kind of specific flavor of weird that you two were doing early days in a UCSD? Maybe Clint, you could describe what y'all are up to.
There was like a shared interest between myself and Ian and a lot of other people who were there. There was a shared interest in the music department there in performance art. And so a lot of us were doing all sorts of things inspired by performance artists. I was doing a lot of reenactments of like pieces from the American 1970s performance art, and a lot of us were just kind of really interested in that sort of thing and incorporating the theatricality, and I think also just like the approach to cultural criticism that is in that genre into our own musical practices. So it was both like an interest in that extra musical performance aspect, but also the ways in which that performance art was engaging in other types of cultural, psychological, spiritual criticism, or whatever it is. At least now I'm kind of getting more into like what was drawing me to that stuff at that time. And it was kind of just, I think, a way for a lot of us to explore other modes of expression while still studying music. And I think that, there was a group, we just all were feeding off of each other and putting on fun, strange events that really kind of defied genre. And I think that was really exciting for me. And I think it was exciting for other people involved that there were no real genre allegiance. And I think in academia, for those of you who haven't been through like art or music academia, you could probably imagine, just because like in a lot of academic contexts, because of the structure of the university and departments and all that, people get their cliques, they get their gangs, and they stick to their clique. And so it was liberating, I think, for us as grad students who were almost like implicitly being asked to join a clique to refuse.
Awesome. Well, so that's some like great context for everyone who hasn't like gotten to know you guys' work. And I think now might be a good time to kind of describe for anyone who hasn't seen it, the really great film that is out this month. It's called It Allowed Them to Produce a Single Sound. Do either of you want to take a stab at describing it, or you want me to do it?
I mean, I can try.
Real quick.
I can give a little context too. It's based on a viral clip from 2020, October 2020. I remember very specifically the first time I saw it because it made me laugh until I cried, which I think was a lot of COVID catharsis. But it's sort of a daytime news report about a little story about how some scientists in England reconstructed a mummy's vocal box with a 3D printer, and it says it allowed them to produce a single sound. And then some YouTuber who is credited in the video, who has a long name that I can't pronounce, overlaid the sort of boring sound that it makes with a scream from a rap video. And it was really funny. It sounds like the one sound the mummy made was that he got punched in the stomach right before he died or something like that, or that was the only thing after 3,000 years of waiting that he could muster up. And there's a lot of like subtext that I invented that made it really funny to me, in addition to the visceral aspect. And so it stuck in my head for a long time. And Clint and I created this piece where we sort of we inhabit this sort of what I perceived as the kind of hubris of this mummy to want to live after death, to want to speak to us so many years later, in some ways kind of pathetic impossibility of preserving your legacy. Preservation is a big aspect of the video. So Clint and I took, or maybe I subconsciously did this, but we kind of took the duo aspect that we were really influenced by the group by, and we were doing a lot of things in unison. And so the clip is kind of playing over and over. It allowed them to produce a single sound, and then the mummy screams, and then I scream, and then Clint screams. We scream together. We make different weird screams. The rhythm is such that there's a bit of I think of it as a suspenseful timing, but it is a comedic timing, I suppose, as well, like making people wait for something and then the same thing happens or nothing happens. And as the video goes on, we explore more. I went and found the original news report, which was really uncanny in its own way, because they show that whole news report and then it cuts back to the desk. And even the anchors don't really know what to do with this story. It sounded really weird. They're trying to contain their sort of uncomfortableness or laughter at what it sounds like. They're making jokes while one of them's trying to get through the report. And it's just like blinding after, 30 seconds of being immersed in this history of mummies or something like that. And so we, as the mummies, I guess, are sort of confronted with this partway through the video act. We've been desperately trying to crawl our way out of death. And now we have to confront not only that we are never going to live, but that some idiots 3,000 years in the future are making a 15-minute daytime segment out of it, and it's never going to be heard from again. That's my interpretation of it, I guess. I mean, that's not really how I write, but that's how I read it back. What do you think, Clint?
Yeah, I'll add that, and maybe this is something for a question later on that you already have planned, Jen. But we did it first as a performance with the video projected behind us and us live doing this sequence of desperate maneuver at self-preservation. But I really like the video version of it because it brings the media aspect of preservation into it. So like the documentation. So to put us in video, to have the newscasters also in, I think also adds this. It's yet another gesture of a desperate attempt at self-preservation. But yeah, you can kind of see the whole thing is like a theme and variations just on that. Failed attempts at self-preservation.
Right. Well, and that does kind of like lead to one thing I thought would be interesting to talk about kind of explicitly, because you've got kind of several cultures intersecting in this. Like you have news media culture, you have science culture, you have like ancient Egyptian culture, which is, a rich and beautiful uh, history and culture. And then you also have like the audience culture of like death phobia and like an obsession with youth and eternal life. And I thought it could be nice to like talk about like, what are the things you're like poking at and like parroting and like critiquing through like this mash of like kind of different cultures that have like intersected at this in this small news clip moment.
Yeah, I don't tend to think of critique as such in what we do. I mean, I'm sure it can be read there. The way I think of it is really, like you said, more sort of pointing at things and making certain aspects of media experience louder and larger and make it hard for you to get away from them and see what happens when you have to stick with them for a while. So obviously in both my chamber music and this kind of thing, I use a lot of repetition as a way of sort of creating a world and really setting a baseline for everyone's sort of reactive experiences to the artwork. So there's that aspect of it, and I think that works well with TV like this that is sort of meant to be on mute at a bar at 10 a.m. It's not really meant to be looked at more than once. It's not really meant to be even listened to. It's just really meant to be content in the ultimate form, like seriously filler. And we know, which is not to dump on the work that those people do. We're all sort of doing that in some sense. Um, but in sort of repeating the news clips and really getting into the nitty gritty of the specific details they decide to talk about when they have 2 minutes to talk about. I mean, we're talking about how pathetic this mummy is, but it's also a 3,000-year-old mummy with inscriptions in its coffin about how it wanted to speak after death and a desire from the ancient world fulfilled by modern technology. Like that phrase gets repeated a lot and has a really silly sort of, I don't want to spoil too much, but like a really silly, very silly instrumental going over it. The desire from the ancient world fulfilled by modern technology. And I just love listening just to that phrase over and over and thinking about, it's like a lot of the sort of, whenever there's a new technological hype, I mean, there's a lot of AI hype right now. And I think I certainly, maybe there's some critique. I certainly read some of that into like AI. Finally, all of our ancient desires are being fulfilled by modern technology, And so I sort of also, we're not just making fun of that mummy, but I see a future 3,000 years from now where, very Ozymandias, like everything that we built for ourselves is just or something to whoever is watching the videos. Then
Yeah, if I could, it really reminds me of like when I grew up speaking French and English, and then I decided to learn Spanish, and it was like this challenge for myself, and I really worked at it. And then I went and traveled somewhere to a Spanish-speaking country, and this mom and a child were on a bus, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can understand what they're saying. And the kid was just whining to his mom, like, my pants are wet, and she was like, yeah, we'll be home in a minute. And I was like, okay, as it turns out, we're all just saying the same dumb things to each other. Except, like, I mean, of course, like this, my own kids complain about their pants are wet, and I'm like, we're home in a minute. To think of somebody like really studying English so that they can like get into our culture, and like as it turns out, that's what I'm saying. And I think about that with your video a lot of this like this desire to connect and this and that, and it's like, oh, they were able to produce this sort of kind of sound. And I remember hearing that clip as well on the news, and it impacted me just as a musician, right? As a person who's really interested in sound and what things sound like. And then it's like, oh, as it turns out, you need a tongue, which we all suspected all along. But also, like, not just that it would make a sound, but that it would, like, that they'd be able to communicate their thoughts and feelings, because that's truly what the mummy wanted, right? But then scientists just take them at this literal word for it, and they're saying, oh, you want to speak after death? Here's speech. And there's like, but what is speech with no content? And I think that's something that is really that was impactful to me, because Jen and I were both at your live performance. And after the live performance, Jen was like, oh, I had a little secret stopwatch running, and we could totally make that into a video. Like it's not too long. And that's sort of what got the wheels going for this? Because I wanted to ask you a little bit about like why there's two of you in this piece, because I understand that you were a duo first and things like that, but you're also people who compose for different kinds of configurations, and you're not necessarily only writing for this duo. In fact, I would say it's more frequent that you're writing for not your duo. And Jen and I kept coming across this as we were storyboarding it and planning the filming process, was like, oh, well, could we just cut to one of them doing this section? And the answer was no. And then we're like, well, why are there two? Like, that was something that we were really curious about. And I know that if I can leave you some breadcrumbs for your answer, you had mentioned things like rigor and like this highly synchronized aspect of your work. But could you talk a little bit about why you're representing one single mummy's desire with two people?
Yeah, I'll start, and then I'd love to hear Clint's perspective as well. But I think what you said there, that's really part of it. Is, you know, it's harder to do with two people. When one person is doing it, I could have done it at any time, and I could have done it any way I wanted to. I mean, I'm a composer, and this is part of the thrill of composing for me, is like what the situation that's being set up for me. And so if two people have to do this and coordinate exactly, and coordinate with a screen that they cannot see, what's the most efficient but also most effective way to do that is just the way I like to work. And that's the kind of art I like to perceive as well. There's a tradition of this, not just but I also think of like the work of Natacha Diels and Jessie Marino, who've done a lot of this symmetrical stuff. Clint did a piece with another composer friend of ours named Bob Pierzak called Meet Your Mirror, which with great theatrical people also at UCFD after I had left. That is about symmetry. There's a great sort of philosophical aphorism about symmetry and its dangers that starts it off. And so again, I think symmetry in this sense is uncanny, and that adds to the effect of the uncanniness both of what the mummy wants, what the mummy got, and how it's being reported on. And I mean, without wanting to sound too amateurish, it just makes it a little more theatrical, I think.
Clint, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, definitely. So for me, I think one is just purely from the aspect of being a performer composer, that I think that synchronizing rhythmically and performatively is a fun challenge. It makes practice more fun, and it's like a nice sort of like it's a good system to like set out as for like when you're collaborating together as composers. Okay, we're going to do the same thing, and it kind of helps to make a lot of decisions for you. But I also think with the mirroring, because I mean, it isn't just that the two of us are in it. We're like trying to do the same exact thing at the same time. And I think that it's almost like a visual representation of musical repetition, in the sense that like repetition is always different, especially in music, right? You can hear the same phrase, but if you hear the same phrase the second time, even if it's played closer as possible, or if it's just loops technologically, the second time you hear that same exact phrase, it's different because you heard the first one, right? So I think the same thing happens visually when you see two people standing in front of you dressed the same way, trying their best to do the same exact thing, because it's impossible to do the same exact thing. So I like that tension between repetition and difference that just happens by the nature of us, mirroring one another.
Well, it also makes me think about what you were saying earlier about like by taking like a small segment of the news and seeing it over and over again, you like notice things that you're like forced to like engage with the subtleties of it and the details of it and like sit with it. I think that's also true for the two of you together. When we see the micro differences, we notice things that we wouldn't notice if it was just one of you, because we'd only be looking at the gestalt of it, not like your micro differences. But I hadn't really realized how like that kind of similarity of the way, especially with repetition, it enhances the detail of what you're doing in the rigor. I think you'd also mentioned at one point that it's just like also is a bit of a verification that you're doing something on purpose, like that it's not just freely like, and we love improv over on Music for Your Inbox, but like there's something really like vivid and like visceral about knowing someone's doing something really on purpose, and that the fact that there are two of you means we can know that as a viewer that these are like very, very precise and rigorous gestures. It changes the tenor of all of the actions for sure. Yeah. Well, we've brought up that like, this was a performance piece, and to just get really explicit in case any, it's been unclear, the way this piece is performed is the two of you sit on stage, both facing the audience, kind of next to each other. And then above you is projected the clip of the news clip that loops and goes away and comes back. And you're like engaging with that. So it's kind of like projection and two people. And Cassie and I loved your performance, as did everyone else who was there, because it's a great piece and it was a great performance. And when we decided, yes, we'd love to present this piece, we really talked together as a group, and Cassia, you and I together about, what would it mean to make a film of this? How would it look different? We didn't want to just capture your performance on film, but it's such a minimalist performance. There's not a lot of difference that can be made between two people and a screen on there. So I thought it'd be fun to talk as a group about like what our thoughts were and how the experience of the piece was changed. Cassie, you kind of alluded to this some, so maybe you could start about like how the piece became different as a film instead of a performance.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing that was different was that the audience reaction. I mean, we were really curious about how to solve for that, because in the moment of experiencing this piece, the audience is instant. I mean, everyone's laughing hysterically, because it's hilarious, and also just pulls you right in, because your commitment to performance is something else I kind of wanted to talk about a bit, because it feels like it ties into that rigor, and that's what we were trying to capture with like, oh, these people are going for it. Like, there is not that it's unsafe, but like if someone could aspirate all the Vaseline or something, I mean, I suppose, but it just felt like there's this level of commitment to performance. It's just something that I always admire. I mean, I went and saw like the Rolling Stones, and I was like, okay, yeah, like that is a person who is doing this, and that's always impressive. Even if it's not necessarily a genre of performance that you're connected to, you can definitely connect with someone who's giving it everything, and that's what really struck me about that live performance. And so we were wondering about how to solve for having no audience, because Jen and I have run into this before, or where we capture, I'm thinking of Cousins specifically, like ensembles or small groups that are used to playing off the audience in a way. And this one, you're not playing off the audience because you can't, because it's rigorously timed and mapped out. But I was wondering if the response is giving you more energy, and if that commitment to performance is a little bit based on the audience's response. So that's something that we were trying to solve for. The other thing is that because we had film at our disposal, we could hold a shot longer. You know what I'm saying? Like, we could manipulate things, like the opening. You could sit there for an hour if we chose to have it be like that. So we kind of were asking you to give Jen and I a little bit of control over those aspects. And there is a lot of trust built into this kind of quartet collaboration in that regard. But yeah, I think that would, like, just speaking as sort of the filmmaker side of it, that's what Jen and I were trying to do, is like represent this performance in a filmic way, but also have this void of no audience response, not just feel like you're a comedian giving a routine on Zoom to like a bunch of muted microphones or something.
Another thing we were really engaging with was like the knowledge that there would be another screen, like another kind of intersection between the viewer and your performance, and like how could we capitalize on that and make it like and allow that to enhance some of the media aspects that are already in the piece, because you are dealing with news media, and it's something it's inspired by a YouTube clip that we would experience on a screen, and then to have your faces. There's a sense in a lot of the film of, oh yeah, this is their performance, but then how can we like make people aware of their screen? And I'm going to spoiler alert, so anyone who doesn't want a spoiler, step away now or pause or whatever. It will say how many seconds, but There's this great moment in the film or in the performance where y'all smush your faces on plexiglass, which was it was like there's a lot of like kind of it's a body horror in this of like, oh, the flesh of human, like what are we, the squishy fleshy beings, and you're squishing your faces on this plexiglass. It's also allowing you to move in the space to your piano. There's like logistical elements of it in the performance. And Cassie and I spent a lot of time thinking about like, well, what is that moment on film when we don't have to have you move? We can just edit. There's no need for you to travel or, the functionality of that in a performance changes when it's not logistically required. But we have this beautiful thing that we in this film, there is another screen we can engage with. So instead we had this idea that we loved that you were willing to go along with, where we had plexiglass between the camera and y'all, and you squish your face on this plexiglass, and it feels like you have come up to the viewer's screen and are like smearing your nasty Vaseline covered faces all over the inside of my computer or television or whatever it is. And it's silly and gross and fun, but also like makes this object, this interface that we're dealing with so vivid. And I really loved that we were able to like create a version that gave that kind of sense of touch, because what Cassie is talking about, there's some loss, there's the communal loss, there's the like group laughter loss, so like what can we make more vivid, so there's this version of the piece has kind of a different aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean,
Of course, we went along with that idea. She is a great.
yeah, I mean, like that moment I'm a total horror movie nerd, and it's like it's a horror movie technique, and it works when you think about like how the media is being presented. So like if like horror movie, I guess like classic horror movies would be projected on a screen, and so when you have a shot of an axe coming through a wall, it's like it's coming through the screen. It gives you that kind of like that the wall itself is this, and so this kind of does the same
thing. Like we're actually squishing through towards you. Yeah, horror movie kind of way, but it's fun.
Yeah, I mean that was all really relevant because I definitely am someone who like makes pieces with their premiere performance in mind. And so I was thinking of like live performance and the spaces we were likely to be in, which is where the projection screen came from, and like how are we going to sit, where are we going to move, and the way Clint and I sort of write together. I mean, I had the basic idea for this piece, but we come together in rehearsal and we really work out a lot of stuff together. We throw out ideas. We're very good at saying, no, that stinks, or that's a really good idea to each other, I think. And so we sort of developed a piece. Okay, what do we do? I remember the moment we were like, what if it was like Vaseline that we rub on our faces? Because we were thinking of all different kind of like baby powder. Well, we started with baby powder, but that was going to come later. And then sort of at the end, it's like, we've got this crap all over our faces. What's something? How do you turn it up a notch a little bit? To how do you move the desperation forward? And so coming up against glass, was one easy way to do that. And so yeah, your solution in the video is like one of the absolute best things that happened in the transition from this piece from the theater to the film, I think. And yeah, it was a wild experience performing it because especially the LA performance, there were a lot of kids there, and so it was a lot of kids like laughing and screaming about how gross it was, led by my son, of course. But
it's okay. I brought four children to that show. I feel guilty.
Well, it created this really awesome, raucous atmosphere almost, but that meant the moments where we are holding and waiting, the suspense was really thick as well. And so, yeah, I was one of those artists who was nervous about putting this on film because, I mean, without sounding too dramatic, it was just really not what I meant for the piece to be at all. It was for me to have more than one chance at it. Like only having one chance at it is the whole reason we're doing it in one sense, And I mean, we're all on this call here, but like when you guys came to us with the storyboard, I was like, oh, like okay, like this is out of my hands now. Like these are filmmakers, so I can just like do what they say. And that was a really awesome experience because that in our less and less institutionalized and more individualized art world, it's not something that we get to experience very much. And so it was really collaborative. And I don't know anything about making films, and so it was educational. And yeah, we came up with something that is not something I would have come up with, or we would have come up with maybe, but that is an awesome artifact, I think.
Well, we're glad that you're happy with it turned out how it turned out, because it was sort of like a train that left the station and we were like, this is what's happening. I feel like when you were talking about trying to create those, because that was something that Ian, you and I talked about on the call at some point, was just trying to create these like more and more dramatic and futile attempts at communicating, because there's that moment that's very bittersweet where the mummy is sort of like in that gladiator, like, are you not entertained? And then it cuts to the people back in the newscasting that are just laughing hysterically, and y'all are just like completely crestfallen, just totally broken. Like, how can they not understand me? But I think that, like, you took the off. Okay, so because as a string player, we're like, oh, we're gonna make a crescendo, right? We're gonna up the intensity. We'll start very quiet. But y'all started at like a 6 out of 10. Like you walk on stage and you're just covered in baby powder with like, it's already like, oh my gosh, right? And then you kind of gave yourself this challenge of like, okay, well now there's this Vaseline. Okay, now we've got like, our tongues are hanging out, we're bashing on bells. Like I'm curious, like, did you ever think about starting at 0 and then going up? Or were you always like, no, we're going to start like already a mess and then have people wondering, how much worse is this going to get?
I think one of the reasons we found Ed and Phil so inspiring is that they were so serious about silliness. Like there was never anything but 100% at stake in what they're doing, no matter how many people were laughing in the audience, and no matter how silly. And they do some really silly, like sillier than we were doing stuff. And so that is part of the challenge. But I think one of the things that the multimedia aspect of it does is allow us to introduce that moment that you talk about is such a complete shift of everything, of tenor, of affect, because we go from the sort of, I don't know anything about film, but the sort of B-roll report where there's a voiceover of what's happening back to the studio, which if you saw the viral clip and if you watched the piece up to that point, which is halfway through, you didn't even know there was people in the studio. I didn't know there was people in the studio the first time I saw that clip. And so now there's people in the studio, and it's almost like their complete contrast in how seriously they are taking it with how seriously the mummy characters have been taking it, even though like it's sort of, it's sort of down in seriousness, the switch of it in context of the performance, like it's like, whoa, like what the hell is going on now, and so I don't know, that's sort of musically how I think about it. And I think you get that a lot in sort of experimental music as well, like really effective moment to moment experimental music.
Yeah, I know for me, a lot of the crescendo, so to speak, without there actually, like, or the way you maintain intensity is, I think you're both such masters at like, how far can we push this so that people are just almost completely over it, or like starts to feel normal and comfortable, and then you change something, and the change, there's so much like smart like changes, and sometimes they're massive and sometimes they're small, that just keep that kind of like intensity and following. And I wondered if, I think it could be really fun for people who have watched it, so we'll do spoiler alerts again because I love going deep, to talk about like why you chose some of the things that are in the film, because they could, like just with like oh, that's a cool video, you could think that they're pretty random. Like there's vuvuzela in it, there's an Aztec death whistle, there's the death bells that you have 2 of, and like why those? What are they doing in the film? They're not just random sounds, even though they could be seen that way.
I now remember the Vaseline moment because I think it was something like, what if we rubbed Vaseline all over our faces, or something like Vaseline? And then we were like, well, let's find the other thing that will actually rub on our faces. And I'm pretty sure Clint was like, no, that's good. Let's do Vaseline. Like, there's going to be nothing that's going to be as good as that. And that was true. It's sort of a curio cabinet thing, I guess, like where the things are coming on screen. I mean, on live, they're all sort of next to us, but they're not really featured. So I think they're still surprising. The vuvuzela, I just wanted the loudest instrument I could
Yeah,
find.
I feel like, didn't you put like a Facebook call out to people?
Post, like,
Because I remember people, yeah, people were just answering
everybody vuvuzela, and then I think our boy Mark Barton was the one who came up with the Aztec death whistle, which is, I don't know. I mean, there's some legend that people, indigenous people used it to scare the people that they were fighting against or something. I don't know if that's true. I got it off of Amazon, but it makes this horrible noise. But it sounds like lots of people screaming in really agony. And so, I mean, it was suggested because it's supposed to be loud, or like the loudest, at least in perceived volume, instrument that there is. But I mean, people screaming at the horror of death fit in a little too well with what we were going for. And so at the sort of, I don't know if I call it the climax of the piece, but it's definitely at the midpoint of the arc, is right where that happens. It's the most we can possibly do at the moment where we're getting this voiceover about to speak again after death, a desire from the ancient world fulfilled by modern technology. And so that seemed like it's not quite a red herring. Like maybe you think that's the end of the piece because there's a little bit of a pause, and then boom, big anchor face, comes in your face. That's sort of where that comes from. I don't know, Clint, do you remember anything else?
Yeah, I mean, the process-wise, when we're putting ideas together, kind of like once we have like the general premise of the piece, we're just kind of exploring and having fun and just tossing around ideas. But I think that like once you kind of have laid out the premise and the kind of overall themes, that kind of guides the decisions. And because I mean, yeah, like earlier, Ian, you said with the piece or in general, like you're not making a statement, but really like maybe pointing at things, I think is what you said, which I like that. I kind of also think of it as like creating resonances between ideas, and then through the presentation of maybe the different ideas that aren't necessarily directly connected, by making them simultaneous and then repeating them, these resonances build over time and they become really rich, and you can kind of see them from all these different angles, not just one way. And so like with the individual, like the instruments that we chose, like when we're throwing ideas around, okay, well, we could make this sound, we could use that instrument, we could use that instrument. Like, like, okay, but we also have this whole mummy thing, this whole death thing. So, if we use handbells, it's like you're in a waiting room. Like, like, hello, can you please begin? Or when you have these vuvuzelas, it's like a trumpet announcing an arrival. And so I think also once we have that kind of established in like our collaborative composition process, then it's like, this sound makes sense because it connects into the larger piece in this particular way. It sort of helps you to make the decision when it's like, well, it could be any of these loud instruments, but you're like, but like think, totally like trumpet, signaling, like some sort of spiritual arrival or whatever.
I remember we had a kind of similar moment on the film set where, we've mentioned Vaseline a lot. So y'all have your faces covered in powder. And then there's a moment where you scoop out a bunch of Vaseline and then just start smearing it all over your faces. And every element it's such a minimalist film and performance that every element like makes a statement. And we had this moment where we're like, well, do we have the Vaseline containers, or you all had like chalices? And which one's better? And I remember saying, well, if it's Vaseline, I think it references the beauty industry more. And if it's a chalice, it represents more like an ancient serum, or this like the cup of eternal youth, or fonts of eternal youth, or something like that. And so there was it was like a choice of like, which one are we going to reference in? And I think you're right that like there's this like, there's the broader idea, and then you can like refine the details of like what you're referencing. And I like that idea of resonance, like how it's better than the word juxtapose, which is the one I overuse in all of my grant applications.
I think that's a nice highlighting of the difference between the theater and the film too, because in the live version we just had big canisters of Vaseline, name brand, say Vaseline on the front, And everybody, I'm on the internet here, you gotta go. And so in live performance, you like the audience sees Vaseline, it's like, oh my God, that's Vaseline. Whereas in the film, when we have it in the little chalices, because you're so much closer to the experience with the film and you have more time with it almost, it's more of like, well, what is that? Is that like, cocoa butter? Like that, like what are we talking about here? And so I think that's a nice difference.
Mm-hmm. Cassie, did you have other questions, or I don't want to?
I didn't. I mean, those were my main things. I think I just I really wanted to thank you two for so much trust in us as like kind of taking this really special thing that the two of you just made yourselves at home and like trusting us to turn it into something that would work for film. I think that was kind of got us all fired up about the piece. And that was one of the scariest shoots I've ever done because there was a lot of like, you can't go back. You know what I mean? Like once you get all gummy and strange, like there's no like, oh, let's just take that again, you know? And so it felt like a performance for us, I think, in that, you know, we didn't want to like mess up the camera aspect of it. I think that, or the filming of it or the order of the shots. And I think some of that does kind of come through in the film, and that like everything was just so perfectly keyed up so that we could just get this one thing. So it still felt like fresh and alive, like a performance, and not stayed like a totally produced film. And we did make it in Jen's garage, which is, I don't know, it felt very, I don't want to say on brand because that's sort of like a silly thing to say, but it felt like it was really in keeping with the artistic integrity of what you had already created.
Well, I'm sorry it was scary for you because it was absolutely luxurious as far as I was concerned. I mean, someone could
Wasn't
be
that
out.
scary?
Like we did our live performance at 4 p.m. on Dogstar, and then there was a night show that I wanted to go to, and so I was like, who do I know with the closest apartment to Automata that I can shower in to give us a Spasolino so I can go back? So not having to worry about that sort of thing was really nice as well.
Yeah. It wasn't scary bad. It's more just like scary because you care. You know how that works as an artist. Like when something is intense because you care so much.
No, I mean, I think what you guys have made a really unique and needed way of getting art to the people in a time, again, when it's becoming harder to do that and harder for people to do it together. So this was a real honor for me.
Well, thanks again, guys. I want to make one last thing at the end of this. I want to share that this film is paired with visual art by Ariel Oakley, who made this really beautiful piece, Every Breath Ever Taken. And Ariel is a nurse in the operating room and has done a lot of work with like transplants and is dealing with like what is death when parts of us go on living. And so it's really cool to like see your art together, this like idea of like when does life end, or you know, and all of this sense of longing and to leave something behind. And we're just so glad to have the film out, and people should absolutely check it out because it's hilarious and really fun and thoughtful. You get all of it for one day. So so thanks for joining us, guys, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks for chatting.
Thank you.
Guys.
Okay, bye.